All right, so it's 1:31, so we're going to get going. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Hope you're having a great Wednesday so far. We're going to jump into our client-facing reconciliation video. So just a little side note here, we're not going to be touching on banking reconciliations. This is strictly client reconciliations held in client billing. So some of you may recognize my voice from previous phone calls. If you don't, my name is Emily. I'm sure we've chatted before. I am a customer care specialist. I've been working with Amilia for a little over a year. Joining me to help us out on chats, we have Lauren, who is the customer care team lead, and she's been with Amilia for a little over 3 years now. So this webinar will be recorded, so you can relive the magic at any time. You can access it from our knowledge base, and a link to it will also be included in the roundup email that you will be receiving shortly after this webinar. So this will also include all questions that were asked in the chat, as well as answers that Lauren will provide. So you can ask your questions. I'll show you shortly where to ask those. If ever we don't get to all the questions because we run out of time, don't worry, we will address them and they will be included in the roundup. So this is how you're gonna ask your questions. You'll see the little panel on the right side of your screen, and you have a little chat box where you can type in your questions and Lauren will help with the answers. So this is the agenda of what we'll be covering for today. So what is a reconciliations, what the symbols mean, how do I see what's reconciled together, different ways to reconcile in clients' accounts, how to delete reconciliations, where to find a list of unreconciled items. We're going to do a practice in a more complicated account and go through the list of frequently asked questions. So what is a reconciliation? In front of us here, we have an invoice and a payment. At the moment, there is no link between the two. What a reconciliation is important for is to let us know that these two transactions will actually be paired together. So for example, when you go to a store, say you go to the grocery store, you get an invoice, which is the list of all the items that you purchased, and you'll get a small slip of paper that'll be your payment. So for example, if you paid with a credit card, it'll say you paid $80, and stapling these two transactions together will let us know that that $80 payment went towards that receipt with groceries. One of my personal favorite examples to use is the puzzle piece. This is especially important when it comes to invoices that have multiple transactions associated to it. So for example, an invoice that has installment payments, it's more important than ever to make sure that those are reconciled together so we can see the bigger picture of what this invoice entails and which payments are associated to it. So why is it important to reconcile? It's important to reconcile in order to link together the transactions. So in this example in front of us, we have a membership purchase for Julie Hogan, and the ledger code is ledger code 1000. So right now, these two transactions are reconciled together, so we can see that this payment of $100 is associated to this invoice of $100, and all of that revenue is going under the 1000 ledger code for memberships. So we can see that payment here. So you'll notice that payment details are a little bit less detailed. We're not going to have a ledger code associated to a payment, which makes it even more important to reconcile. So it gives us the bigger picture and lets us know that this payment is associated to that invoice and will be under that ledger code. So on to that subject, invoices and credits have ledger codes while payments and refunds do not. So this makes it especially important to know where your revenue is going. So you have invoices and credits, but you want to know what's coming in for payments and what's going out for refunds. So this is especially important with reconciling as it will affect in your financial reporting. So we're going to go touch on what the different symbols mean. So there are 5 different symbols that you may have seen already. So we got the green check mark, which means that the transactions are reconciled. So you'll see Lauren's account here. We have a $100 invoice and a $100 payment, which are fully reconciled together. So partially reconciled, so the blue circle that looks like a target. So here for Tony Stark, you'll see that there's an invoice of $50. My apologies. There we go. Everyone hear me again? Sorry about that. Okay. Little technical difficulty there. Sorry about that. All right, so we see Tony Stark here. There's an invoice of $100 and only a partial payment of $50 that's currently reconciled. So that payment is fully reconciled. However, the invoice is still missing a $50 piece in order to be fully reconciled. So you'll notice at the top right that he has a current balance of $50. So once that payment has been issued, or if there's a credit, you'll be able to reconcile the invoice. So not reconciled, so this little orange triangle. When you see this, don't worry too much about it. This does not mean that the payment failed or the refund failed. This just means that these transactions have not been linked together just yet. So back to Lauren's account example, right now there's a $100 invoice and a $100 payment, but there's no link between the two. So the system is not going to automatically assume that these transactions go together, especially if the payment came in after the invoice. You'll notice that at checkout, when there's an invoice and a payment done at the same time, they will automatically reconcile. But if the payment happened a little bit later, it's not going to assume that it's going towards that invoice, so we have to reconcile those two transactions together. So reconciled with post-dated payments, so you'll see a blue check mark. You'll see here in Sydney Crosby's account that there's an invoice of $514.50 and a partial payment of $42.87. So that would have been the initial payment done at checkout. And we have post-dated payments that are upcoming. So at the moment, sorry about that. At the moment, there's a current balance of $471.63 and an expected balance of $0. This means that once all of the post-dated payments have been addressed, we will be able to see that this account is fully reconciled. This reconciliation error, so this scary red triangle, is quite rare. It happens from time to time. If you do notice a reconciliation error, you can report it to us, as this is a glitch and it is not supposed to happen. So for example, in this account, you'll see that there is a red reconciliation error on this cancellation transaction. If we take a closer look, we'll see that there is a $250 payment reconciled to a $10 cancellation invoice. So this is too much of a credit, too much money associated to it. So how we can address this is simply delete the reconciliation by clicking on the little orange trash can here, and then we can redo the reconciliation. I'll touch on how to delete a reconciliation a little bit later. So how can we see what's reconciled together? Here we have Kimberly Jacobs' account. So we can open up the blue plus, go down to reconciliations to open it up. Here we can see the transactions that are reconciled, so either payments or credits, as we are looking at an invoice. So we can see the transaction number. So it ends in 603, it's a check payment, and we can see that it's this one that's just above that is currently reconciled. So here's the same example with a little bit more detail. So we can open up the blue plus once again, click on reconciliations. We can see that there's that $500 check payment, and we can actually see what's associated. So we can see that there's a chunk of $450 associated to one item and $50 to another. If ever we'd like to adjust these, we could always click the modify button held here, and we can manually enter in a different amount. Say we want just a little bit less on one and more on the other, we can make these adjustments and save. So how do we reconcile? There are two ways to reconcile. There's the automatic reconciliation, so we can do it for the individual account. So that's found under the Operations tab, and you can click Reconcile Account. This will reconcile everything together in the chronological order that it appears in the account. So we'll see the example here. We have an invoice and a payment that are currently unreconciled. So we're going to click the reconciliation button. It's going to ask you if you're sure. Depending on how many transactions are in the account, this could take a few seconds. It'll automatically refresh the page and you'll see that everything is now reconciled. There's also a way to do this on a mass scale from the Clients tab. You can go to the Clients tab under Accounts, click on the Operations menu, and reconcile all accounts. This will take it may take a few minutes if you have many client accounts. As I said, it'll piece together everything in the accounts in chronological order how they appear in the accounts. So this may take a bit, but it will let you know once it's finished and refresh. There's also a way to manually reconcile, which we will see here. So if we wanted to go in and do it ourselves, we can go in and open up the reconciliations, and it'll show us all available transactions to be reconciled. In this case, there is only the one. We can choose the amounts we want to apply. Once we're satisfied with the amounts, we can save at the bottom. The account will refresh and this will be reconciled. So how to delete a reconciliation. So deleting a reconciliation, if say we accidentally reconciled something and it wasn't the right transaction or whatnot, we can easily go click on the little trash can. It'll ask you if you're sure and delete. So this will just break the link between these two transactions. If ever deleting the reconciliation was a mistake, then you can re-reconcile those, no problem. So not to worry about that. This will not cancel any payments or transaction. This is simply breaking that link between these two transactions. So we can find a list of unreconciled items. This is held under the Accounting and Finance tab. The sub-tab is called Unreconciled Items. So here you'll see a list of all unreconciled items in your account. There is a little menu on the top here that we can filter different date ranges. So the last month, 3, 6, 12, or per year. So before we go into the practice account, I'm going to leave a minute or two for questions. So you can write them in now. If you wanted to get up and stretch your legs, take a little break, we'll be back in just a minute or two. So just to reconfirm, if ever you do ask questions towards the end, not to worry, these answers and questions and answers will be addressed in the roundup that you'll receive by email, and that can be accessed at any time in the knowledge base, so not to worry about that. Just give a few more seconds here before you move forward. All right, so let's jump in. So here we have Mackenzie's account. In this video, I'm going to start by doing an action that's going to undo all the reconciliations. So this is an Amilia only tool. If ever this is needed for any of your accounts, you can let us know either by email or chat, and we'll be happy to undo the reconciliations. So you're going to notice that's the first step that I take here. So once all these transactions are unreconciled, I'm going to start from the beginning. So on page 5, there's a $500 invoice, but there's actually no associated payment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the transactions that are straightforward. So for example, this $500 invoice is associated to the payment just above, so 915. I will find that guy in the list, so it's the last one here, and I'll reconcile that together. So moving up the list here, I'm going to continue to reconcile all the transactions that are straightforward. So here I have 252 broken down between two items, and I'm going to reconcile. So I've only shown a few, but in the next step that I'm going to be showing here, I have pieced together all of the transactions that were straightforward. All right. So in this second example, I have an invoice here that has post-dated payments linked to it. So there's an initial payment of $10 for that item and an initial payment of $8.33 for the second item. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find the associated transactions. So I know that there was $18.33 for the initial payment. So I'm going to go ahead and reconcile those pieces together and making sure that I'm associating the correct amounts to the correct items. So now I can continue to reconcile the payments that I know are the post-dated payments. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on the list of the $10 pieces, always making sure that I'm reconciling to the correct item in the invoice. So you'll notice the last one here is for $8.37, which I know goes with the second item. So I'll reconcile that together. So now, once I've done that, you'll notice that there's still an unreconciled piece of $133.30. This is due to this invoice having been canceled after the fact, and all of the post-dated payments that were remaining had been canceled as well. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the credit memo from the cancellation and use this to reconcile the rest of that balance owing. So I'm going to select that transaction here. So there's a $50 chunk and an $83.30 chunk left over, which you'll notice will leave me with a partially reconciled credit, which then I can use towards other transactions in the account, and the invoice is fully reconciled. So the last step here, for the sake of this example, since I do not work for this organization, I'm going to use the reconcile account feature to reconcile all the remaining transactions in the order that they appear in the account. Of course, working for your own organization, you may have more of a clue as to which organizations go together, so you can piece those together now. And then any others, you can use the reconcile account to piece together. So now our account that was fully unreconciled just a few minutes ago is now reconciled and is good to go. Now we're going to move on to the frequently asked questions. I see an orange triangle. Does that mean that the refund or payment didn't go through? It does not. So how I mentioned earlier is that it simply means that there is no link between these transactions at the moment. So the system will not automatically assume that these transactions are linked. So we'll go in and either manually reconcile or automatically reconcile using the reconcile account tool. I'm trying to reconcile this account, but this orange symbol won't go away, the balance on the account. This means that there is a single or could be multiple. There are multiple unreconciled transactions that currently have no transaction to reconcile with. So you'll notice in Lauren's account, we have an invoice of $50, and there's also a current balance of $50. That means that this account cannot be reconciled until there is either a credit or a payment of $50 to reconcile to this invoice. If I change the reconciliation, will that affect my reports, and how? Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, only invoices and credits have ledger codes, so it's very important to reconcile the payments and refunds that are associated to these transactions in order for our ledger code reports to be accurate. What does it mean in the payment by ledger code report reconciled with no ledger code? So kind of piggybacking onto what I was saying earlier, as invoices and credits are the only ones who have ledger codes, if, say, there is a payment and a refund that are reconciled together, this will create an entry into this section of the report. So no ledger code reconciled. So the transactions are reconciled, but there's no ledger code attached to either or that lets us know where this revenue is supposed to go. So here's an example in the account. So we have a refund of $100 that's been reconciled to a payment of $100, but because neither of these have ledger codes, the system isn't going to know which ledger code it's supposed to attach this amount to. Some important things to remember: always reconcile as you go. I cannot stress this enough. It's always best to reconcile when you do transactions or actions in the account, as you may not know, but if you leave all of the unreconciled transactions and you come back to the account a month later, you might not remember what occurred. It's always best to reconcile as soon as you can. You cannot reconcile when there is a balance or a credit balance. So this just means that there is a balance that's awaiting either a payment or a credit, or a credit that is waiting to be used or refunded. Payments and refunds do not have ledger codes, which makes it even more important to reconcile to let the system know where these amounts should be going. And changing the ledger codes is immediate and retroactive. So anything that you change, so if you change an invoice and you link a payment from 2018, it's going to retroactively change all of these settings in your reports, and everything will be reflected as it is in the account. So as mentioned at the beginning, this recording, as well as all questions asked and answers, will be included in the knowledge base so that you can access the knowledge base at any time from the Home tab under the support box, and there's a direct link there. If ever there's something that you haven't gotten answered by the knowledge base articles, you can always click on the bottom right-hand corner to send us a message, and we'll be happy to help you out. So I'd like to thank everyone for your attention. Really happy that you joined us today, and we'll see you next time. We'll leave the floor open for a little bit for any last minute questions, and we'll see you at the next webinar.